Winston Park was alive with the vibrant hum of community life. The sun hung high, its golden rays casting playful shadows on the grass where families gathered for picnics. The scent of barbecue wafted through the air as children shrieked with laughter, racing across the playground. Amara Carter, an 8-year-old girl with tight curls that framed her face like a halo, stood near the swings. Her dress, a cheerful shade of yellow, flared as she spun in excitement. She challenged her best friend, Layla, to see who could swing higher, pumping her legs energetically. "I'm winning," Amara shouted, giggling as the swing creaked with her effort. Layla pouted playfully. "No fair. You got a head start." Meanwhile, Officer Greg Daniels, a tall, broad-shouldered white officer in his mid-40s, patrolled the park in his marked police SUV. His crisp uniform and mirrored sunglasses reflected the scene, but his expression was unreadable. As he drove slowly past the basketball court, his presence caused a ripple of unease among the residents. "Why's he here again?" murmured one mother, clutching her toddler closer. "Always looking for trouble," another man muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Daniels parked his vehicle near the playground and stepped out, his hands resting on his belt. He began to scan the area, his gaze lingering on groups of teenagers gathered near the basketball court. Amara's attention was drawn to the cheerful jingle of the ice cream cart as it rolled toward the playground. She gasped and turned to her mother, Denise Carter, who was seated on a nearby bench, chatting with a neighbor. "Mama, can I get ice cream? Please," Amara asked, bouncing on her toes. Denise smiled indulgently and fished a crumpled $5 bill from her pocket. "All right, baby, but don't go far. Stay where I can see you." "Yes, ma'am," Amara chirped, snatching the bill and darting toward the cart. The line at the ice cream cart was short, and the vendor, a jovial older man named Mr. Brown, greeted the children with a warm smile. "What'll it be, young lady?" he asked Amara. "A chocolate cone, please," Amara said, her eyes lighting up as she handed him the money. As she waited, she noticed Officer Daniels standing a few yards away. He leaned against his patrol car, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the basketball court. Though she didn't understand why, his stern demeanor made her stomach tighten. A sharp shout interrupted the tranquility of the park. "Heads up!" called one of the teenage boys playing basketball. The ball ricocheted off the backboard and rolled across the grass, heading straight for the ice cream cart. Amara turned just as it reached her feet. She bent to pick it up, cradling the oversized ball in her small hands. "Here," she called, trying to toss it back. The ball wobbled in the air and veered off course, landing near Officer Daniels. Daniels turned abruptly, his face darkening. His boots thudded against the pavement as he walked toward the ball. "Hey, watch it!" he barked, his voice sharp. Amara froze, her bright smile vanishing. "I am sorry," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Daniels leaned down to pick up the ball, his glare cutting through her like a cold wind. "You need to be more careful," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. Amara's small frame seemed to shrink under his gaze, and she nodded quickly, her curls bobbing. "Yes, sir." Mr. Brown, the ice cream vendor, watched the exchange with growing concern. He stepped forward, holding a cone in one hand. "She's just a kid, officer," he said, his voice calm but firm. Daniels straightened, narrowing his eyes at Mr. Brown. "I don't need your input," he snapped. Denise Carter, who had been keeping an eye on Amara from the bench, noticed the tension and stood. She hurried toward the scene, her heart pounding. "Amara, is everything all right?" "Yes, Mama," Amara said quietly, though her wide eyes betrayed her fear. Daniels glanced at Denise, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Your daughter needs to learn to watch where she's throwing things," he said curtly. "She's 8, Denise replied, her tone clipped. "I think you're overreacting." For a moment, it seemed the confrontation would end there. Daniels dropped the ball at his feet, muttering under his breath. But as Denise began to usher Amara away, Amara accidentally bumped into his leg while reaching for her ice cream. Daniels snapped. "Watch it," he growled, raising his hand instinctively. Before anyone could react, his palm connected with Amara's cheek. The sound of the slap silenced the park. Amara stumbled backward, clutching her face in shock. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at her mother. Denise froze, disbelief etched on her face. Then, fury erupted. "You hit my baby!" she shouted, stepping protectively in front of Amara. Nearby parents and bystanders began to gather, their murmurs swelling into shouts of anger. "What did you just do?" a man from the basketball court yelled, stepping forward. His friends followed, their expressions a mix of anger and disbelief. Daniels raised his hands defensively, his voice firm. "Everyone, back up. It was an accident." "An accident?" Denise cried, her voice trembling with rage. "You hit my child." Amara's sobs broke through the growing commotion. Layla ran to her side, hugging her tightly. More people gathered, their voices rising. "This is why we don't trust y'all," one woman shouted. "You think you can do anything you want." Daniels reached for his radio, his face tense. "I need backup at Winston Park. Crowd control situation," he said into the receiver. Denise knelt beside Amara, wiping her tears and examining the red mark on her cheek. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though her own hands were trembling. She stood and faced Daniels, her voice like steel. "You are not walking away from this." Daniels tried to maintain his composure. "Ma'am, I already said it was an accident. Let's de-escalate this situation." Denise's eyes blazed. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down. You put your hands on my child, and you're going to answer for it." The crowd's voices grew louder, their anger palpable. The second patrol car pulled up, two officers stepping out cautiously. They surveyed the scene. The furious crowd, the crying child, and Daniels standing stiffly by his squad car. One of the officers approached Daniels. "What's going on here?" Daniels gestured toward the crowd. "They're overreacting. It was an accident." "An accident?" Denise shouted. "He slapped my daughter." The second officer's face shifted, his gaze moving to Amara's tear-streaked face. "Is that true?" he asked quietly. Amara nodded, her small voice breaking. "He hit me." The scene became a cacophony of voices as bystanders filmed the incident on their phones. Denise pulled out her own phone, documenting everything. "You're not getting away with this," she said to Daniels. One of the backup officers placed a hand on Daniels' shoulder. "Greg, we need to take you in for questioning. Let's handle this the right way." Daniels looked stunned but nodded, realizing the situation was beyond his control. As the crowd began to disperse, Denise held Amara close. "We're going to make sure everyone knows what happened," she promised. Amara nodded, her tears slowing. "Okay, Mama." The Carter household was unusually silent that evening. Amara sat curled up on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, her face streaked with dried tears. Denise paced the living room, her phone glued to her ear. "I want every detail, Janine," Denise said to her sister, who worked at the mayor's office. "I don't care how high this goes. That officer hit my baby, and I'm not letting it slide." Amara's father, Marcus, entered, his face lined with exhaustion from his construction shift. "How's she doing?" he asked softly. "She won't eat," Denise replied, lowering the phone for a moment. "Marcus, he hit her. I saw it with my own eyes." Marcus sat beside Amara, his large hands gently brushing her curls. "Hey, sweet pea," he said. "We're gonna fix this. I promise." Amara looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did he do that, Daddy? I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "I don't know, baby, but he was wrong, and we're going to make sure he knows it." By morning, multiple videos of the incident had flooded social media. Denise watched one clip on her phone. Officer Daniels standing stiffly while a furious Denise shouted at him, Amara sobbing in the background. The caption read, "Police brutality has no age limit. Justice for Amara." Denise scrolled through the comments. "This is disgusting. Protect black children. How is he still on the force? There's no excuse for this." Her phone buzzed with a call from a local reporter. Mrs. Carter, we'd like to feature your story on tonight's news. Can we meet for an interview? Denise hesitated, glancing at Amara, who was watching cartoons on mute. I'll let you know, she replied. Officer Daniels sat in an interrogation room at the precinct, his hands folded tightly on the table. Across from him sat Lieutenant Karen Brooks, a black woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor. Greg, walk me through what happened, she said, her voice measured but firm. It was an accident, Daniels said, his tone defensive. The girl bumped into me, and I reacted instinctively. I didn't mean to hit her. Brooks raised an eyebrow. You hit an 8-year-old. Accident or not, this is serious. The videos don't help your case. Daniels frowned. This is being blown out of proportion. I've served this city for 20 years. And that doesn't exempt you from accountability, Brooks interrupted sharply. Denise sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, including a printed copy of her formal complaint against Daniels and a stack of legal brochures. Marcus poured her a cup of coffee. I reached out to the Civil Rights Alliance, Denise said. They're putting us in touch with a lawyer. Marcus nodded. Good. What about the media? You ready to go public? Denise hesitated. I want justice, but I don't want to traumatize Amara more. Marcus placed a hand on hers. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Denise took a deep breath. We'll do it. People need to see what he did. Outside the Carter home, neighbors gathered, holding signs that read, Justice for Amara and Protect Our Children. A group of mothers organized a peaceful march to the police station, their voices echoing through the streets. Amara is every one of our children, shouted one woman. We won't let this go unanswered. Denise stepped onto the porch with Amara at her side. The crowd erupted into applause, chanting, We've got your back. Amara clung to her mother's hand, her voice small. Mama, why are they yelling? They're standing up for you, baby, Denise said, kneeling down. Because you didn't deserve what happened. Denise sat in her living room with the local news crew. The reporter, a kind-faced woman, asked gently, Mrs. Carter, can you walk us through what happened that day? Denise recounted the incident, her voice trembling with emotion. He slapped my daughter, and he acted like it was nothing, like she was nothing. The reporter turned to Amara, who sat quietly beside her mother. Amara, how are you feeling now? Amara hesitated, looking at her mother for reassurance. I'm scared, she said softly. I don't want to go back to the park. The reporter nodded solemnly. What do you hope comes from this? Denise's voice hardened. Accountability, not just for that officer, but for every system that allows this to happen. At the police union headquarters, Daniels met with his representative, Carl Jensen. The room was tense as Carl reviewed the complaint and videos. This doesn't look good, Greg, Carl said. You need to go on record with a formal apology. Daniels scoffed. Apology? I didn't mean to hit her. Why should I apologize for a mistake? Carl sighed. Because public perception matters, and right now, you're the face of everything wrong with policing in this city. You want to keep your pension? Play ball. Daniels reluctantly agreed, though his resentment simmered beneath the surface. That evening, the Carter family sat together in the living room. Denise showed Marcus and Amara the emails pouring in from supporters. Look at this one, Denise said, smiling. It's from a teacher in Texas. She says Amara is an inspiration. Amara's face brightened for the first time in days. I'm inspiring? Marcus laughed, pulling her into his lap. You're amazing, sweetheart. And people are starting to see it. Amara hugged him tightly. I don't feel scared anymore. Denise leaned back, exhaustion giving way to a small sense of hope. They were only beginning this fight, but they would face it together. Detective Carla Price, a seasoned investigator with internal affairs, sat in a windowless room at police headquarters, reviewing the case file. The video footage, witness statements, and Danielle's brief preliminary report lay in front of her. Her face hardened as she replayed the viral video on her laptop. He really hit her, she muttered, shaking her head. She called her partner, Detective Jason Moore, into the room. Moore leaned over her shoulder, watching the video. This is bad, he said, grimacing. If we don't handle this right, it's going to destroy what little trust the community has left. Price nodded. Then let's make sure we do it right. I'll start with Daniels. You handled the civilian interviews. Daniels sat across from Price in the sterile IA interrogation room. He appeared calm but visibly frustrated. Officer Daniels, let's go through the events of that day, Price said, her tone even. Daniels leaned back in his chair. I was patrolling the park, keeping an eye on things. The girl threw a basketball near me, and later, she bumped into me. I reacted instinctively. It wasn't intentional. Price raised an eyebrow. Instinctively? What exactly do you mean by that? Daniels hesitated. She startled me. I didn't mean to hurt her. Price's voice sharpened. Yet you hit her, a child. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Daniels' jaw tightened. It's being blown out of proportion. Price stared at him, her expression unreadable. We'll let the facts decide that. Detective Moore arrived at the Carter household to speak with Denise. She welcomed him and cautiously, her demeanor guarded. I'm here to get your full account, Mrs. Carter, Moore said, pulling out his notepad. Take me through what happened that day. Denise's voice was steady, but her anger was palpable. We were at the park, and Amara went to get ice cream. The officer was already acting tense, glaring at everyone. Then the basketball rolled near him, and my baby accidentally bumped him. That's when he hit her. Moore nodded. Did he say anything after? He tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, Denise said, her voice trembling. Like my daughter didn't matter. Moore glanced at Amara, who sat quietly beside her mother, clutching her bear. Amara, can you tell me what happened? Amara looked up at her mother for reassurance before answering. I said sorry, but he yelled at me. Then I bumped into him, and he hit me. Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her mother's side. Moore closed his notepad, his expression grim. Thank you, Amara. You've been very brave. Outside the police headquarters, a crowd of protesters gathered, holding signs that read, Protect our children, and Justice for Amara. The sound of chants echoed through the streets. No justice, no peace. Inside, Captain Harris watched the scene from his office window. This isn't going away, he said to Lieutenant Brooks. Brooks crossed her arms. It shouldn't. This department needs to take responsibility. Harris sighed. I ain't better move fast. The longer this drags on, the worse it gets. Price and Moore reviewed all available footage, including body cam videos and surveillance from the park. The audio revealed Daniels' harsh tone as he scolded Amara. You need to be more careful, Price read aloud, quoting Daniels. She glanced at Moore. Does that sound like an appropriate way to address an 8-year-old? Moore shook his head. No. And the body cam confirms he escalated the situation. This wasn't just a reflex. His attitude shows a pattern. Price leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. We've got enough to move forward. Let's finish this. Daniels and his union lawyer, Carl Jensen, met to discuss the inquiry. Jensen looked over the evidence with a frown. They're painting you as a monster, Jensen said, flipping through the pages. This video and the community uproar aren't helping. Daniels crossed his arms. I've served this city for 20 years. I'm not letting one mistake ruin me. Jensen sighed. The department's going to need a scapegoat, Greg. If they throw you under the bus, there's not much I can do. Daniels' face darkened, but he said nothing. Denise met with Maya Thompson, the civil rights attorney who had reached out after seeing the news. They sat in a small conference room at Thompson's office, reviewing the legal documents. Mrs. Carter, you have a strong case, Thompson said, but this will be a fight. The department will do everything they can to protect themselves. Denise nodded. I'm ready. I just want justice for my daughter. Thompson smiled. Then let's get started. Price and Moore presented their findings to Captain Harris and Lieutenant Brooks. Daniels' actions were unacceptable, Price began. The evidence shows he escalated a minor incident and used unnecessary force on a child. We recommend disciplinary action, up to and including termination. Harris leaned back in his chair, his face grim. This is going to be a public relations nightmare. Brooks interjected. It already is. We need to act decisively. No cover-ups, no excuses. Harris nodded reluctantly. I'll call a press conference. Let's handle this right. The media swarmed outside police headquarters as Captain Harris stepped up to the podium, flanked by Lieutenant Brooks and a visibly tense Officer Daniels. Microphones and cameras pointed toward him. The murmurs of reporters barely audible over the clicking of shutters. Harris cleared his throat. The Winston Police Department is committed to transparency and accountability. We are currently conducting a thorough investigation into the incident involving Officer Daniels and 8-year-old Amara Carter. A reporter raised a hand. Captain, will Daniels remain on duty during the investigation? Harris hesitated briefly. Officer Daniels has been placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the inquiry. The crowd erupted into a flurry of questions, but Harris stepped away from the podium, ignoring the reporter's shouts. Denise watched the broadcast from her living room, her jaw tightening. Administrative leave, she muttered. That's not justice. As Daniels drove home from the press conference, he passed a wall plastered with posters reading, Justice for Amara. Protesters stood outside his neighborhood holding signs that read, Protect Black Children, and Hold Daniels Accountable. Inside his home, Daniels turned on the news, only to hear his name mentioned alongside terms like excessive force and racism in policing. He slammed the remote down and sat heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. His wife, Linda, approached cautiously. Greg, what were you thinking? She asked softly. I didn't mean to hit her, he snapped. It was a reflex. Linda sighed, sitting beside him. Reflex or not, Greg, people are angry, and they're right to be. At the local rec center, community leaders gathered to organize a response. Denise sat near the front, Amara at her side. As speakers discussed their next steps, Reverend Thomas, a respected activist, addressed the room. This isn't just about Amara. This is about protecting all our children and demanding accountability from those who are supposed to serve and protect. Denise stood, her voice strong. I don't want this swept under the rug. That man shouldn't be allowed to wear a badge ever again. The crowd murmured in agreement, and Reverend Thomas nodded. We'll march tomorrow, to the courthouse. This city will hear us. The march began the next morning, with hundreds of people gathering in solidarity. Amara clutched her mother's hand tightly as they walked, her eyes wide at the sight of the crowd chanting her name. Justice for Amara, the crowd roared. Denise knelt beside her daughter. These people are here for you, baby. They're here because what happened to you matters. Amara looked up at her mother, a small smile breaking through her nervousness. Does this mean he won't hurt anyone else? Denise's heart ached, but she nodded firmly. That's what we're fighting for. Detectives Price and Moore called Daniels back for a second round of questioning. This time, their tone was sharper, the weight of their evidence pressing down on him. Officer Daniels, the body cam audio and witness statements contradict your claim that the slap was purely reflexive, Price said, her gaze piercing. Your tone throughout the incident was unnecessarily aggressive. Daniels shifted in his seat. I was frustrated, but I didn't mean to escalate anything. Moore leaned forward. Frustration doesn't justify hitting a child. Do you understand how serious this is? Daniels glared at the table, his voice low. I understand. The mayor invited Denise and Amara to City Hall for a private meeting, hoping to quell the public outcry. They sat in a polished conference room, the city seal prominently displayed on the wall. Mayor Calloway, a middle-aged man with graying hair, offered them a polite smile. Mrs. Carter, I want to personally express my sympathy for what your family has been through. Denise folded her arms. We don't need sympathy. We need action. What are you doing to ensure this doesn't happen again? Calloway's smile faltered. The department is reviewing its protocols, and we're working with community leaders to build trust. Amara, her voice small but steady, asked, Is he going to say sorry? Calloway glanced at Denise, unsure how to answer. We're not stopping until we get real accountability, Denise said firmly, standing. Not just for my daughter, but for every family like ours. Maya Thompson, the Carter civil rights attorney, filed a lawsuit against the city and Officer Daniels for emotional distress and excessive force. At a press conference, she addressed a crowd of reporters. "This case isn't just about one officer's actions," Thompson said. "It's about systemic failures that allow incidents like this to happen. We demand justice, not just for Amara Carter, but for every child affected by police misconduct." Denise stood beside her, holding Amara's hand. Though the cameras flashed, Denise's focus was unwavering. "We won't stop," Denise said. "Not until this city does what's right." Captain Harris and Lieutenant Brooks met with the district attorney to discuss the case. "This is more than just bad optics," Brooks said. "It's a clear case of misconduct. We need to press charges." The DA frowned. "Charges against an officer are complicated. The union will fight us tooth and nail." Harris leaned forward, his tone firm. "If we don't act now, the community will lose all trust in us. Daniels crossed a line, and he needs to face the consequences." The DA nodded reluctantly. "I'll draft the charges." The city awoke to headlines plastered across news outlets. "Officer charged in assault of 8-year-old Amara Carter." The district attorney's office announced that Officer Greg Daniels would face charges of child endangerment and misdemeanor assault. At the Carter household, Denise read the news on her phone, her hands trembling. Marcus sat beside her, his arm draped over her shoulders. "This is a start," Denise murmured. "But it's not enough." Amara looked up from her cereal, her voice cautious. "Is he going to jail, Mama?" Denise knelt beside her. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure he pays for what he did, baby. But remember, this isn't your fault." Daniels walked into the precinct, his uniform replaced with plain clothes. Officers who once nodded in camaraderie avoided his gaze as he made his way to an empty desk. Lieutenant Brooks approached him, flanked by 2 internal affairs officers. "Greg, it's time." Daniels froze, his jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous." "Stand up," Brooks said firmly. As the IA officers cuffed him, murmurs rippled through the precinct. Daniels's face burned with humiliation, but he remained silent as they led him out. Reporters crowded the precinct steps, their cameras flashing as he was escorted into a squad car. At the rec center, Reverend Thomas held a meeting to update the community on the charges. The room was packed, the energy a mix of hope and skepticism. "This is a step in the right direction," Thomas said, his voice steady. "But we need to keep the pressure on. Justice isn't guaranteed." Denise stood, her voice unwavering. "We won't stop until he's held accountable, not just in court, but by the system that protects people like him." The crowd erupted in applause, their resolve solidified. In her office, Maya Thompson pored over legal documents with Denise and Marcus. Amara played quietly in a corner, drawing pictures with crayons. "We have a strong case," Maya said, adjusting her glasses. "The video, witness statements, and Danielle's record all work in our favor. But we need to be ready for the defense to attack your credibility." Denise frowned. "Attack me? I'm not the one on trial." "They'll try to frame you as overreacting or claim you provoked him," Maya warned. "It's a common tactic." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "This isn't about Denise. It's about what he did to our daughter." Maya nodded. "And we won't let them forget that." Daniel sat across from his lawyer, Carl Jensen, in a sterile conference room. Jensen tapped his pen against the table, his expression serious. "They're painting you as a villain," Jensen said. "We need to counter that narrative." Daniel scoffed. "I've served this city for 2 decades. They're trying to destroy me over one mistake." Jensen leaned forward. "Then we need to humanize you. Community service records, character witnesses, anything that shows you're not the monster they're claiming." Daniels nodded reluctantly. "Whatever it takes." At home, Amara had a nightmare, waking up screaming. Denise rushed into her room, finding her daughter curled under the covers, trembling. "It's okay, baby," Denise said, holding her close. "You're safe." Amara sobbed into her mother's chest. "What if he comes back?" Denise's heart broke. "He won't. I promise. He'll never hurt you again." Marcus stood in the doorway, his fists clenched. Watching his daughter suffer ignited a fire in him, strengthening his determination to fight for justice. The community rallied behind the Carter family, organizing a fundraiser to cover legal expenses. At a local church, residents gathered to donate and show support. Reverend Thomas addressed the crowd. This family is fighting not just for themselves, but for all of us. Let's stand with them. Denise took the stage, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you, all of you. Your support reminds us that we're not alone. Together, we'll make sure justice is served. That evening, the Carters sat together in the living room, the hum of their supporters still fresh in their minds. Denise held Amara in her lap, while Marcus scrolled through messages of encouragement on his phone. People believe in us, Denise said, her voice soft. They believe in you, Amara. Amara looked up, her small face thoughtful. Does that mean I'm brave? Marcus smiled, pulling her into a hug. Braver than most people, sweetheart. As the family shared a quiet moment, the weight of their fight felt a little lighter. The courtroom was packed. Supporters of the Carter family filled one side of the gallery, while a small contingent of police officers and Danielle's family occupied the other. Amara sat between her parents, clutching Denise's hand tightly. Maya Thompson rose to deliver her opening argument. Her tone was calm but commanding. This case is about accountability, she began, locking eyes with the jury. An officer of the law, sworn to protect and serve, used excessive force on an innocent child. The evidence will show that his actions were not only unjustified but part of a pattern of behavior that has no place in our justice system. Danielle's lawyer, Carl Jensen, countered with a calculated argument. This case is a tragic misunderstanding, he said. My client reacted instinctively to a situation that escalated quickly. He has served this city honorably for decades, and we urge you to consider the totality of his service, not just a single moment. Denise took the stand, her hands clasped tightly as she faced the jury. Maya guided her through the events of the day, her questions deliberate. Mrs. Carter, can you describe your daughter's state immediately after the incident? Maya asked. Denise's voice cracked. She was terrified, crying, shaking. She kept asking what she did wrong. Jensen's cross-examination was sharp. Mrs. Carter, were you already upset with Officer Daniels before this incident? Did you perhaps misinterpret his actions in the heat of the moment? Denise narrowed her eyes. I didn't misinterpret anything. I saw him hit my child. The gallery murmured in support as Jensen retreated. The courtroom fell silent as Amara took the stand. She looked small and nervous but sat up straight, holding her bear tightly. Maya crouched slightly to meet her eye level. Amara, can you tell the jury what happened that day? Amara's voice was soft but steady. I bumped into him, and he yelled at me. Then he hit me. It hurt. Jensen approached cautiously for his cross-examination. Amara, are you sure it wasn't just an accident? He asked gently. Amara frowned. He didn't say sorry. He just looked mad. Her words hummed in the air, undeniable in their simplicity. Maya played the viral video for the jury. The room was tense as Danielle's harsh tone and the sound of the slap filled the air. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the footage ended, showing Amara clutching her cheek and crying. Maya turned to the jury. This is what we mean by excessive force. No child should experience this, not from a stranger, and certainly not from someone wearing a badge. Jensen attempted to frame the video as incomplete context, but the damage was done. Jensen called several of Danielle's colleagues to the stand to vouch for his character. Greg has always been a dedicated officer, one testified. He's handled countless situations with professionalism, but under Maya's cross-examination, cracks appeared. Have you ever witnessed Officer Daniels escalate a situation unnecessarily? She asked. The witness hesitated. There were times when he could be a bit short-tempered. Maya nodded. Thank you for your honesty. Reverend Thomas took the stand, representing the community's perspective. We've seen this pattern before, he said firmly. Officers who think they can treat our children however they want because there are no consequences. This case isn't just about Amara. It's about justice for all of us. Jensen's cross-examination attempted to frame Thomas as biased. You're an activist, Reverend. Would you say you have a predisposition against law enforcement? Thomas didn't flinch. I'm predisposed to demand accountability. That's not bias, it's justice. Daniels took the stand, his demeanor carefully controlled. I didn't mean to hurt her, he said, his voice strained. It was a reflex. I regret what happened every day. Maya's cross-examination was relentless. Officer Daniels, the body cam footage shows you yelling at an 8-year-old. Does that sound like someone in control of their emotions? Daniels looked down. I was frustrated. With a child. Maya pressed. Daniels stammered, but couldn't answer directly. Maya addressed the jury one final time. This case isn't complicated, she said. An officer abused his power and harmed an innocent child. The evidence is clear, and the impact on Amara's life is undeniable. It's time for justice. Jensen's closing argument focused on humanizing Daniels. We all make mistakes. My client didn't act out of malice, but out of human error. He deserves understanding, not condemnation. The courtroom fell silent as the jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom emptied as the jury retired to deliberate. Denise, Marcus, and Amara sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, the tension palpable. Amara picked at her sandwich, her normally bright eyes dull with fatigue. How long will it take, Mama? She asked softly. Denise exchanged a glance with Marcus, then knelt to meet Amara's gaze. I don't know, baby, but no matter what happens, we'll keep fighting for what's right. Across the hall, Daniel sat with his lawyer, Carl Jensen. What are the chances they side with me? Daniels asked, his voice tinged with unease. Jensen leaned back, his expression guarded. It's hard to say. The evidence isn't in your favor, but juries can be unpredictable. Daniels' jaw tightened as he stared at the table, grappling with the possibility of conviction. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters gathered, holding signs that read, Justice for Amara, and Accountability Now. Reverend Thomas stood at the front, addressing the group with his commanding voice. This isn't just about one case, he said, his words amplified by a megaphone. This is about sending a message to every system that thinks it can silence us. We demand justice, not just for Amara, but for every child who has been harmed by the abuse of power. The crowd cheered, their chants echoing through the courthouse walls. No justice, no peace. Amara peeked out a window, her face lighting up for the first time that day. They're all here for us, Mama, she whispered. Denise smiled, brushing a hand through her daughter's curls. Yes, baby, they are. Hours passed with no word from the jury. In the courtroom, the Carters sat quietly, their hands clasped together. Reverend Thomas and several community members filled the gallery, their presence a silent show of support. Maya leaned over to Denise. The longer they deliberate, the more likely they're debating key points. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Denise nodded, though the anxiety was etched across her face. I just want this to be over. Marcus squeezed her hand. Whatever happens, we've done everything we can. The bailiff entered the courtroom and announced that the jury had reached a verdict. A hush fell over the room as everyone filed back in, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Denise held Amara close as the foreperson stood, pulled in a folded piece of paper. Daniel sat stiffly, his expression betraying his nerves. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, the foreperson replied, handing the paper to the bailiff. The judge unfolded the paper and read aloud, his voice steady. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant, Greg Daniels, guilty. On the charge of misdemeanor assault, we find the defendant guilty. The gallery erupted in gasps and murmurs. Denise let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Amara tightly. Daniels' face fell, his lawyer placing a hand on his shoulder. The judge continued. Sentencing will take place in 30 days. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers as news of the verdict spread. Denise and Amara stepped out to a sea of supporters, their chants echoing in the crisp evening air. Justice for Amara. Maya addressed the crowd. This verdict is a step toward accountability, but the work doesn't stop here. We must continue to fight for a system that values every life equally. Denise spoke next, her voice strong despite her tears. Thank you to everyone who stood with us. This isn't just our victory, it's a victory for all of us. Amara clutched her mother's hand, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. Back in his holding cell, Daniel sat alone, staring at the concrete walls. His career, his reputation, and his sense of self had crumbled in the span of weeks. He replayed the incident in his mind, unable to ignore the weight of his actions. For the first time, he muttered aloud, "I shouldn't have done it." But the words felt hollow, far too late to make a difference. That evening, the Carter family sat together at home. The air felt lighter, though the scars of the experience lingered. Amara drew pictures at the coffee table, her laughter returning in small bursts as she showed her parents her work. Denise watched her daughter, her heart swelling with relief and pride. She turned to Marcus, her voice soft. "We did it. We really did it." Marcus kissed her forehead. "You did it. You never backed down." As Amara crawled into her mother's lap, Denise held her tightly, vowing silently that she would always protect her little girl, no matter what. The courtroom was once again packed as the judge prepared to deliver Danielle's sentence. The Carter family sat in the front row, their hands intertwined for support. Amara sat between her parents, clutching her bear tightly. Judge Mendez glanced over his notes before addressing the room. "Officer Greg Daniels, you have been found guilty of child endangerment and misdemeanor assault. These crimes represent a breach of trust, particularly in your role as a sworn officer of the law." Daniels sat stiffly, his expression unreadable. The judge continued, "This court sentences you to 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and 500 hours of community service. Additionally, you are hereby stripped of your position within the Winston Police Department." The gallery murmured. Some were disappointed by the perceived leniency, while others saw it as a victory against the usual systemic protection of officers. Denise turned to Maya. "Is that it? He doesn't even have to go to jail?" Maya placed a hand on her arm. "It's not perfect, but it's a significant step. He's been held accountable in a way most officers never are." Outside the courthouse, the mood was mixed. Some protesters celebrated Danielle's firing, while others voiced frustration at the lack of jail time. Reverend Thomas addressed the crowd. "This sentence is far from everything we hoped for, but it's a start. For too long, officers have avoided accountability. Today, that changed, even if only slightly." Denise stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "This fight isn't over. It's bigger than Greg Daniels. It's about making sure no other child has to go through what Amara did. We won't stop until the system changes." The crowd cheered, the chant of "Justice for Amara" rising once more. Daniels reported to his probation officer a week after the sentencing. Dressed in plain clothes and looking worn, he sat in the small office, answering questions about his community service plan. "You'll be volunteering at the local youth center," the officer said, glancing at her notes. Daniels stiffened. "The youth center?" "That's correct," the officer replied curtly. "It's a good opportunity to reflect on the impact of your actions." Daniels nodded reluctantly, feeling the weight of the situation sink deeper. A month later, Denise took Amara to Winston Park for the first time since the incident. The playground was bustling with life, just as it had been that day, but Amara hesitated at the gate. "You don't have to go in if you're not ready," Denise said gently. Amara held her mother's hand tightly, then nodded. "I want to play." As she ran toward the swings, Layla greeted her with a wide smile, and the two girls giggled as they raced to see who could swing higher. Denise watched from a nearby bench, tears welling in her eyes. Marcus sat beside her, squeezing her hand. "She's stronger than we know," he said softly. "She gets that from us," Denise replied, a small smile breaking through her tears. The city organized a public forum to discuss police reform, inspired by the Carter case. Maya Thompson was one of the keynote speakers, alongside Reverend Thomas and Lieutenant Brooks. Amara's case is a turning point, Maya said to the crowd. But a single case isn't enough. We need systemic change, mandatory de-escalation training, independent oversight of misconduct cases, and community partnerships. The audience erupted in applause, their energy reinvigorated. Denise spoke next, her voice steady and impassioned. We've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. It's up to us to demand better, not just for our families, but for every family. Daniels began his community service at the local youth center, surrounded by the very children he once patrolled with suspicion. He was assigned to clean and organize, a far cry from his former authority as an officer. One afternoon, a young boy asked him, "Were you the cop who hurt that girl?" Daniels froze, unsure how to respond. Finally, he muttered, "Yes, I made a mistake." The boy frowned. "Don't do it again." Daniels nodded, the simplicity of the child's words cutting deeper than any reprimand he'd received. Denise and Amara became fixtures in the community's push for reform. They attended rallies, spoke at schools, and participated in workshops about the importance of accountability. At one event, Amara stood on stage with her mother, holding the microphone nervously. "I was scared when it happened," she said, her voice trembling, "but my mama told me I was brave. And now, I want to help other kids feel brave too." The audience gave her a standing ovation, and Denise hugged her tightly, pride radiating from her. Months after the sentencing, the Carter family gathered in their living room. Amara sat on the floor, drawing a picture of her family holding hands in front of the courthouse. "That's us fighting for justice," she explained, holding it up. Denise smiled, her eyes misty. "It's beautiful, baby. Just like you." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a look of contentment on his face. "We've come a long way," he said. "And we're not done yet," Denise replied. "But for now, we can breathe." Amara climbed onto her mother's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. Denise kissed her forehead. "You don't ever have to be." A year after the trial, Winston Park buzzed with life once again. A newly installed memorial plaque near the playground read, "Dedicated to the strength of our children and the pursuit of justice." Denise stood with Amara in front of the plaque, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. "You see this, baby? This is for you and every kid who deserves to feel safe." Amara traced her fingers over the engraved words, a proud smile spreading across her face. "Does this mean I helped?" Denise crouched beside her. "More than you know." At the police precinct, Lieutenant Brooks oversaw a training session focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. The training was mandatory for all officers, a direct result of the outcry following Amara's case. Brooks addressed the room of officers, her voice firm. "Incidents like what happened to Amara Carter cannot and will not be tolerated. We have a responsibility to this community and to ourselves to do better." Miguel Reyes, a rookie officer, raised his hand. "Lieutenant, what's the most important thing we can take from this training?" Brooks paused, meeting his gaze. "Empathy. If you can't see the humanity in the people you serve, you don't belong here." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. At school, Amara stood nervously in front of her class, presenting a poster titled, "What Justice Means to Me." The poster featured pictures of protests, her family, and a drawing of the courthouse. "Justice means standing up for what's right," Amara explained. "Even if it's scary. My mama says it's about making things fair for everyone." Her classmates clapped as she finished, and her teacher, Ms. Wilson, smiled warmly. "Thank you for sharing that, Amara. You're very brave." Amara beamed, her confidence shining through. Greg Daniels scrubbed graffiti off a wall at the youth center, sweat dripping down his brow. The work was monotonous, but it gave him time to reflect. As he finished, a group of kids passed by, one of them recognizing him. "Hey, aren't you that cop from the news?" Daniels nodded, unsure how to respond. The child shrugged. "Hope you learned your lesson." Daniels stared after them, the words sticking with him long after they'd gone. Denise and Maya stood together at the launch event for the Amara Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting children and advocating for police accountability. The room was filled with supporters, community leaders, and activists. Denise took the stage, her voice steady and passionate. This foundation is about more than one case. It's about ensuring that every child feels safe and valued. We're here to create change, not just for Amora, but for generations to come. The audience erupted in applause, their enthusiasm fueling Denise's resolve. At home, Amara sat at the kitchen table, carefully writing a letter to her future self. "Dear me," she wrote, "don't forget how strong you are. You helped make things better. Keep being brave and helping people." Denise watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. "What are you working on, baby?" Amara grinned. "A letter to remind me to keep being brave." Denise kissed her forehead. "You're already the bravest person I know." Denise met with city officials to discuss expanding the Amara Foundation into schools. The program would teach children about their rights and empower them to speak up when something felt wrong. Mayor Calloway, who had grown into an ally over the past year, nodded in agreement. "This is exactly what our city needs. Let's make it happen." As the meeting ended, Denise felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Carter family gathered in their living room, flipping through a scrapbook of news clippings, photos, and thank you letters from supporters. Amara pointed to a picture of her standing in front of the courthouse. "That's when we won, right?" Marcus smiled. "That's when we took the first step. There's still a lot more to do," Denise added. "And we'll do it together." Amara grinned, leaning into her parents' embrace. "I think we can do anything." Winston Park looked different than it had a year ago. New murals adorned the walls, painted by local artists to reflect the strength and resilience of the community. One depicted a young girl holding scales of justice, her curly hair unmistakably modeled after Amara. Denise and Amara strolled through the park, pausing to admire the mural. "That's you, baby," Denise said softly, her voice tinged with pride. Amara stared at the mural, her small hand gripping her mother's. "Does this mean I'm important?" she asked. Denise knelt beside her, cupping her daughter's face. "You've always been important, Amara. Now the whole world knows it." At the youth center, Greg Daniels worked quietly, stacking chairs after an event. Though his community service hours were completed, he had volunteered to stay on, a decision he made after months of reflection. A young girl approached him, clutching a soccer ball. "Can you help me pump this up?" Daniels nodded, taking the ball from her hands. "Sure." As he worked, the girl asked, "Do you like it here?" Daniels hesitated, then nodded. "It's different from what I used to do, but I think it's good for me." The girl smiled. "You should stay. You're not so bad." For the first time in months, Daniels allowed himself a small smile. The Amara Foundation celebrated its first anniversary with a citywide event at the rec center. Families, activists, and local leaders gathered to honor the progress made and plan for the future. Maya Thompson stood at the podium, her voice filled with optimism. This foundation started with one child's bravery and a mother's determination. Today, it stands as a beacon for change, not just in this city, but across the nation. Denise took the stage next, holding Amara's hand. "This fight has been hard, but it's shown us what's possible when we come together. We're just getting started." Amara leaned into the microphone, her voice clear. "Thank you for helping me and my family. We're going to help more kids now." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. Lieutenant Brooks spearheaded a new oversight committee composed of community members and law enforcement representatives. Their mission was to review cases of misconduct and recommend reforms. In their first meeting, Brooks addressed the group. "This committee is about more than accountability. It's about trust. We're here to make sure that no one feels powerless, no matter their age, race, or background." The members nodded in agreement, their shared commitment creating a foundation for lasting change. One evening, Denise received a letter from a mother in another city. It read, "Dear Mrs. Carter, I saw what you and your daughter did. It gave me the courage to stand up for my own child. Thank you for showing us what it means to fight for justice." Tears welled in Denise's eyes as she read the letter aloud to Marcus and Amara. Amara grinned. "We helped them, Mama." Denise hugged her tightly. Yes, baby, we did. And we'll keep helping. Denise, Marcus, and Amara returned to the courthouse, this time to meet with lawmakers working on statewide police reform. As they passed the courtroom where the trial had taken place, Denise paused. This is where it all started, she said softly. Amara looked up at her. But it's not where it ends, right? Denise smiled, her heart swelling with pride. No, baby, it's just the beginning. Months later, the city unveiled a new initiative inspired by the Carter family's efforts. The Amara Project, a comprehensive program focused on protecting children's rights and fostering trust between communities and law enforcement. Denise spoke at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. This project represents hope. Hope for our children, hope for our communities, and hope for a future where justice isn't a fight. It's a promise. Amara cut the ribbon, her smile bright as the crowd cheered. We did it, Mama. Denise hugged her, whispering, we did it together. That evening, the Carters celebrated quietly at home. They sat around the dining table, sharing stories and laughter. Amara held up a picture she had drawn. Her family standing together, surrounded by smiling children. This is us helping people, she explained, her eyes sparkling. Denise kissed her forehead. That's exactly who we are, baby. Marcus raised his glass. To family, to justice, and to never giving up. They clinked glasses, their unity stronger than ever. Years later, Amara stood in front of a crowd at her high school graduation. She had grown into a confident, articulate young woman, her curls now worn proudly in a halo around her face. Years ago, I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, she said, addressing the audience. It means standing up even when you are. My family taught me that, and I'll carry it with me always. Denise and Marcus sat in the audience, tears streaming down their faces as they applauded their daughter. The Carter family returned to Winston Park, where the mural of Amara had been updated to include a plaque. In honor of the Carter family, for courage, resilience, and the pursuit of justice. Amara ran her fingers over the words, her smile radiant. Mama, we really made a difference, didn't we? Denise wrapped an arm around her. Yes, baby, we did, and we always will. As they walked hand in hand, the sun setting behind them, the park filled with the sound of children's laughter. A fitting tribute to the family who had fought so hard to protect it.